What if the most important decision you make in life is not simply what you believe, but who you follow? What if every idea you absorb, every influence you trust, every voice you allow into your thinking is quietly guiding the direction of your soul? And what if the Qur'an tells us that on the day of resurrection, human beings will not be called forward by their wealth, not by their status, not by the identities they claimed, but by the leaders they followed? Because the Qur'an reveals something profound about the human condition. No human being walks through life without guidance. Every mind is shaped by something. Every heart follows something. Every life is pulled in a direction by someone. The real question is not whether we follow. The real question is who or what has become our guide. In our previous episode, we reflected on the honor of the human being, how God elevated the children of Adam, how He entrusted humanity with intellect, with responsibility, and with moral choice. But that honor raises an important question. If human beings possess such immense capacity, how are we meant to navigate truth and falsehood in a world filled with competing voices? Are we left to discover guidance entirely on our own? Or has God ensured that humanity is never without a guide? The Qur'an tells us in Surah al-Isra, that is Surah number 17, verse 71, يَوْمَ نَدْعُ كُلَّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ. On the day when we will call every people by their Imam. In this episode of reflection, we will explore the Quranic principle that every people receives guidance, the meaning of the word Imam in the Quranic worldview, why humanity will be called by the leaders on the day of resurrection, and the responsibility every human being carries in choosing whom they follow. Because according to the Quran, the guides we choose in this life may ultimately determine the path we stand upon in the next. One of the most consistent themes in the Qur'an is that humanity is never abandoned to confusion. Human beings are not left to wander through existence without direction. From the earliest moments of human history, God has continually provided guidance. Guidance that clarifies truth, guidance that exposes falsehood, guidance that illuminates the path toward what is right. The Qur'an expresses this principle in a remarkably concise statement, as anchored in Surah Al-Ra'd, that is Surah number 13, verse number 7. وَلِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ هَادٍ. And for every people, there is a guide. This verse reveals something profound about divine mercy. Guidance is not a rare interruption in history. It's a permanent feature of the human condition. Every community, every civilization, every generation, at some point in their history, guidance reaches them. Sometimes that guidance appears through prophets, sometimes through those entrusted with preserving divine knowledge, and sometimes through individuals who clarify truth when confusion spreads. In Tafsir al-Mīzān, ʿAllāmah Ṭabāṭabāʻī explains that this verse reflects a broader Quranic pattern. God never leaves humanity without a means of direction. Divine justice demands something important. Before people are judged for their choices, they are first given the opportunity to recognize the path. Guidance, therefore, comes before accountability. But the presence of guidance does not guarantee that it will be accepted. History shows us this again and again. Prophets were rejected, truth was resisted, and voices of wisdom were often drowned out by louder influences. So the problem is not always the absence of guidance. Sometimes the problem is simpler. Human beings refuse to recognize it. Take a moment and reflect on this. If every people receive guidance, then the real question is not whether guidance exists. The real question is, will we recognize it? To understand the scene the Qur'an will soon describe, we need to pause and reflect on an important word. That word is Imam. Today, many people hear this word and think only of someone who leads prayer in a mosque. But in the Qur'an, the meaning is far broader, far deeper. Linguistically, Imam simply means someone who is followed, a guide, a leader, a model whose path others adopt. An Imam is not defined merely by authority. An Imam is defined by influence, by the direction they set, by the path others begin to walk because of them. And the Qur'an uses this word in two striking ways. In some verses, the Qur'an speaks about leaders who guide people toward truth. For example, the Qur'an says in Surah al-Anbiya, that is Surah number 21, verse 73, وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا. And we made them leaders guiding by our command. These are leaders whose guidance is connected to divine instruction, figures whose role is to illuminate the path toward God. But the Quran also uses the same word in a very different context. It speaks about leaders who guide people toward corruption, leaders who pull others away from the path of truth. The Quran describes them in powerful terms in Surah Al-Qasas, that is Surah number 28, verse 41. وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَدْعُونَ إِلَى النَّارِ. And we made them leaders, inviting to the fire. The same word, Imam, used for leaders of guidance and leaders of misguidance. This reveals something profound about the Quranic understanding of leadership. So, not every leader brings people closer to truth. Some illuminate the path, others distort it. Some elevate the human soul, others gradually pull it toward moral blindness. In Tafsir al-Mīzān, ʿAllāmah Ṭabāṭabāʻī draws attention to this dual usage because leadership in the Qur'an is not limited to religious authority. Anyone who becomes a point of imitation can function as an Imam. A prophet may be an Imam, a divinely guided leader may be an Imam, and so too may be a tyrant, a cultural figure, a powerful ideology, or even a worldview that quietly shapes how people interpret reality. Because human beings are by nature imitative creatures. You see, we absorb ideas, we adopt perspectives, we follow examples, often without realizing how deeply those influences are shaping the direction of our lives. Pause here for a moment. If an Imam is simply someone whose path others follow, then ask yourself, who has most shaped the way you see the world? Whose voice influences your thinking? And whose example quietly guides your choices? After establishing that guidance is never absent, and after seeing that the Quranic word Imam can refer to leaders of truth or leaders of misguidance, the Quran now presents one of the most powerful scenes in its description of human accountability. A scene from the day of resurrection, a day when hidden loyalties are exposed, a day when private alignment becomes public realities, a day when people not stand only with their deeds, but with the path they chose to walk. The Quran describes a moment from that day, a moment when humanity is gathered not by nation, not by wealth, not by status, but by something far more revealing. The Quran says in Surah Al-Isra, Surah 17, verse 71, يَوْمَ نَدْعُ كُلَّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ. On the day when we will call every people by their Imam. This is an extraordinary expression. The verse does not say that people will simply be called by their names. It does not say they will be gathered by tribe or generation. It says they will be called by their Imam, by the leader they followed, by the guide whose path they adopted, by the example whose direction shaped their lives. And this is precisely where ʿAllāmah Ṭabāṭabāʻī in Tafsir al-Mīzān draws our attention. He explains that the verse is pointing to something deeper than simple association. It is pointing to moral alignment. Who did you trust? Who did you imitate? Whose way of seeing reality became your own? Because in the Quranic worldview, following is never neutral. To follow someone is to slowly allow their priorities to enter your life, their assumptions, their values, their standards, their direction. And over time, the path of the follower begins to resemble the path of the one being followed. So on the day of resurrection, people are called with their Imam because that leader represents the path they chose. If they follow truth, that truth will appear. If they follow falsehood, that falsehood will appear. And the verse continues, فَمَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابَهُ بِيَمِينِهِ. Then whoever is given his book in his right hand, فَأُولَٰئِكَ يَقْرَؤُونَ كِتَابَهُم. They will read their record, وَلَا يُظْلَمُونَ فَتِيلًا. And they will not be wronged even the slightest amount. Those who follow true guidance are not lost in that gathering. They are honored. Their record is placed in the right hand. Their efforts are preserved. Their sincerity is remembered. Their struggles are not erased. Because divine justice loses nothing, not the smallest effort, not the quietest act of sincerity, not the most hidden moment of faith. Nothing is lost, nothing is exaggerated, nothing is ignored. Every allegiance, every choice, every act of following, all of it is accounted for perfectly, completely. Sit with that for a moment. If the Qur'an says humanity will be called by the guides they followed, then ask yourself, if that moment arrived today, whose path would you be standing beside? The Quranic scene we just witnessed is both powerful and sobering. Human beings gathered with the leaders they followed. Those who chose truth, honored with their record in the right hand. Every action accounted for with perfect justice. But immediately after this moment of clarity, the Quran introduces a warning about something far more dangerous than ignorance, something far more serious than simple error. The Quran warns about spiritual blindness. It says in Surah Al-Isra, that is Surah number 17, verse 72, وَمَنْ كَانَ فِي هَذِهِ أَعْمَى فَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ أَعْمَى وَأَضَلَّ السَّبِيلَ. Whoever was blind in this life will be blind in the hereafter, and even further astray from the path. This blindness is not physical. The Quran is not speaking about the loss of eyesight. It is speaking about the blindness of the heart, a blindness of perception. A person may see the world clearly with their eyes, yet remain unable to recognize truth. In Tafsir al-Mīzān, āllāmah Ṭabāṭabāʻī explains that this blindness refers to something very specific. It is the condition of a person who encounters guidance but refuses to acknowledge it. Someone who sees signs of truth but dismisses them. Someone who hears clarity but prefers the comfort of familiar ideas. Over time, this rejection changes the soul. The ability to recognize guidance begins to weaken. Truth begins to feel unfamiliar. Falsehood begins to feel normal. And what once disturbed the conscience slowly becomes acceptable. This is how spiritual blindness develops. Not suddenly, but gradually. A person ignores a moment of clarity, then another, until eventually the soul becomes comfortable living without guidance. And the Quran warns that if this blindness becomes permanent in this life, it will remain permanent in the next. Because the hereafter is not a completely separate reality. It is the unveiling of the condition we formed here. The blindness carried in the heart becomes visible. The misdirection cultivated in life becomes the path we stand upon. Consider that carefully. The greatest danger in life is not simply making mistakes. The greatest danger is losing the ability to recognize truth when it appears. When the Quran tells us that humanity will be called by their Imam, it is not only describing a distant moment in the hereafter. It is asking us to examine something happening right now. Because every human being is already following something. Some people follow ideas, some follow movements, some follow cultural voices that shape how they see the world. And sometimes people follow something even more subtle, their own desires. The Quran itself warns about this with a striking question in Surah Al-Jāthiyah, that is Surah number 45, verse 23. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen the one who takes his own desire as his God? In other words, even the ego can become an Imam. Even the inner impulse of the self can become the guide that directs a person's life. And this is why the Quran places such importance on who we choose to follow. Leadership in the Quranic worldview is not simply about authority. It is about direction. Who shapes the way you understand right and wrong? Who influences the priorities of your life? Whose voice quietly determines what you consider meaningful, important, or true? Because the influences we normalize eventually become the path we walk. This is why divine guidance has always been accompanied by individuals whose lives embody that guidance. Prophets were not sent only to deliver information. They were sent to become living examples of the path. And in the Islamic tradition, the Ahlulbayt represent the continuation of that illuminating guidance. Individuals whose knowledge, whose integrity, and whose spiritual clarity preserve the direction revealed by God. In Tafsir al-Mīzān, ʿAllāmah Ṭabāṭabāʻī reminds us that guidance in the Qur'an is not merely theoretical. True guidance must be embodied. It must exist in the world through figures whose lives demonstrate what alignment with divine truth actually looks like. Without such guidance, human beings easily become lost among competing voices. And that is why the Qur'an continually invites us to examine whom we follow, because the path of a person rarely diverges far from the example they admire. The leaders we elevate eventually shape the horizon of our thinking, and over time, they shape the destiny of our souls. Ask yourself honestly, whose example has quietly become the compass of your life? Because long before the day of resurrection arrives, the direction of our path is already being chosen. As we step back from what the Quran has shown us today, 4 insights begin to emerge. First, human beings are never left without guidance. God does not abandon humanity to confusion. Across history and across generation, guidance reaches every people. The real question is whether we recognize it. Second, an Imam is anyone whose path people follow. Some leaders guide towards truth, others guide toward misguidance. And every human being eventually aligns with influences that shape their thinking, their values, and their direction. Third, on the day of resurrection, humanity will be called by the guides they followed. Our allegiances in this life are not temporary. They become part of the identity by which we are judged. Fourth, spiritual blindness begins in this world. When guidance is repeatedly ignored, the ability to recognize truth begins to fade. But those who sincerely seek divine guidance are never abandoned by God. The Quran reminds us that the most powerful influence in our lives is not always the most visible. It is the voice we trust, the path we imitate, the guidance we choose to follow. Because one day, every soul will stand beside the guide it chose. In our next episode, we will explore another profound question. Can human beings ever truly become perfect? Is moral perfection possible? Or is perfection something that belongs only to prophets and the divinely guided? Join me as we explore what the Qur'an and the teachings of the Ahlulbayt reveal about the true potential of the human soul. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Reflection. If you found this reflection meaningful, consider sharing the episode and subscribing to the channel so more people can discover these Quranic insights. And if you enjoyed this episode, a like on the video really helps the channel grow. Until next week, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.